A covenant between two species that would lead to a galactic empire of 7, hundreds of worlds, and the near extinction of the Forerunners' chosen people. A holy war, a crusade to commit genocide, all stemming from a single misconception, perpetually extended by lies and wrongful translations. This is the story of how self-exile and an attempt to atone for committing a galactic cleansing led to the rediscovery of a 100 millennia long buried secret. After activating the Halo Array and wiping out millions of species, the Forerunners waited to make sure the flood would be starved out before they could reseed the galaxy with all the species they had wrongfully robbed of a future. The leader amongst them, a Forerunner once known as Born Stellar, but most commonly known as the Isodidact, left a message as parting words after committing the greatest crime ever conceived. He proclaimed that the Forerunners would go on a great journey due to the activation of the Halo Array. This great journey referred to their exile to another galaxy, to live off the land in a primitive style, to swear off their technology and all the ruin it brought to their home galaxy. This message would be echoed within the remains of the Forerunners' technology. After the receding of life on Janjor Quam, the Sanshayum were left with a gift not meant for them. It was a single miscalculation that allowed them to discover and even manipulate some Forerunner technology, which in turn led the Sanshayum to advance far more quickly than any other civilization in the galaxy. With a key ship embedded in the planet and being revered as a holy temple, the Sanshayum's technology stagnated for thousands of years. Refusing to enter the ship as they saw it as sacrilege, the Sanshayum were split into two groups: the Stoics that refused to desecrate the holy temple, and the Reformists that sought the gods and their message inside. The Reformers finally managed to get inside the key ship after a 100-year-long war, after which they managed to activate the ship and it took off into space, bringing along with it a large chunk of the planet. This would eventually become High Charity, the holy floating city powered by the Forerunner ship and defended by all the races of the Covenant. With this separation, the Reformists within High Charity would become the Prophets that would later encounter the Sanhili. These prophets would wage a war upon the Sanhili due to their differing dogma. While the Sanshayum believed the Forerunners left their technology behind to be reclaimed by their children, which in a sense was not far from the truth, just an incorrect assumption of whom the chosen people were, the Sanhili believed the artifacts left behind by the Forerunners were holy and to be worshipped, not to be tampered with. However, due to their advantage of having the Forerunner dreadnought within High Charity, the Sanshayum were generally victorious against the elites. This war led to an armistice of sorts between the two species. This would be the Writ of Union. The Writ of Union would be structured in a poetic style, but would lead to the beginning of the Covenant. So full of hate were our eyes that none of us could see. Our war would yield countless dead, but never victory. So let us cast arms aside and like discard our wrath. Thou, in faith, will keep us safe whilst we find a path. This writ would usher in the first age of reconciliation. The Sanshayum and Sanhili would now work together to find the Halos and achieve godhood, like their gods once did. The overarching goal would be to begin the great journey. The idea that the Forerunners created the Halos in order to shed their mortal bodies and become immortal gods that transcend this plane of existence. The great journey would encompass every aspect of life going forward. The elites would be the protectors of the Covenant, while the prophets would lead the way in finding and activating the holy rings. While the great journey would indeed shed their mortal bodies, they would be extinguishing life in a galactic sense instead of achieving godhood. The Great Journey would also be used as a term for their species' goals and individuals. While the elites saw their own individual Great Journey as a means to attain honor and glory that would separate them from the rest in the eyes of their gods, the next step for both races was clear: to find the Halos and activate them. However, the Forerunners had hidden away most knowledge of the Halos' locations. During their time, this was for compartmentalization, to avoid the Halos being controlled or destroyed by the flood, which led the Covenant to continue their great journey in finding the rings, by finding and acquiring as much Forerunner technology as they could. In this manner, the Covenant found the Lekologo. In their search of more Forerunner technology, they found the Legolo consuming Forerunner structures and technology. This instigated yet another holy war, one the Covenant had continuous offsets in. Their refusal to destroy the Forerunner remnants meant They could not use their superior technology to win, and the Legolo abilities to unite as a swarm and overpower any opposition meant the ground battle was also a losing one. With this in mind, the Arbiter at the time was tasked with taming the Legolo. Those who consumed anything but the Forerunner remains were allowed to join the Covenant, and with their help, destroying the heretics that consumed the Forerunner technologies. They were now inducted into the Great Journey after much distress and a highly volatile alliance. The Yan Mi were next to join the Covenant. While the prophets believed there was Forerunner relics on their home world, Palamok, they waged a costly war against the drones. Though the sheer size of the Yanme's numbers overwhelmed the Covenant, they still joined their foes to end the bloodshed and were indoctrinated into the belief of the Great Journey. The next species to be encountered, and therefore inducted into the Covenant, was the Kig Yar. The Kig Yar waged a long and fruitful war against the Covenant, but ultimately, they could see they would not win. The Kig Yar did not lose the battle, but they instead joined the Covenant and their Great Journey as a pretext to survive. This served them well, as it allowed their technology to both advance and improve, and let their society continue to exist and flourish. The Kig Yar did not take the teachings of the Great Journey to heart like the rest of the Covenant species, but their stay as part of the Covenant did eventually rub off on them, enough to the point that they too began to believe in the Great Journey. While not the most devoted, they were on board with the broader idea. It's not known if their intention was to pirate their way into Forerunner riches, but in either case, they joined the journey. After all these species were part of the Covenant and their hunt for the Halos, the next species encountered was the Ungoi. The Ungoi were in fact the first species to not willingly agree to join the Covenant. While some believed the Yanme's were, they were given a choice, and they accepted. The Ungoi instead were enslaved and inducted into the Covenant ranks to complete manual labor and tasks that would benefit the rest of the Covenant species. Forced into slavery, they were quick to adjust their beliefs. They easily and clearly accepted the belief of the Great Journey, and while enslaved, they did support the idea of finding and activating the Halos. The Ungoi would lead a massive rebellion that would cripple the Covenant, which in turn led to the glassing of their home world. However, after their display inability to form a competent and exceedingly dangerous fighting force, they were granted more rights under their station. They became full members of the Covenant. Although still partly enslaved, they could rise to greater heights as individuals with a touch of excellency. Lastly, the Jiralhani were converted to the Great Journey and joined the Covenant. With their extreme combat prowess, as they are extremely aggressive in nature, they proved to be very useful to the Covenant. They too quickly adapted the ways of the journey, the Great Journey, in their belief that the Forerunners were gods, and they could achieve godhood eventually, as well through the service of the Covenant and their prophets. The Brute's willingness to be the first to take their place in a holy salvation led to a new age in the Covenant. The Human-Covenant War was instigated based on the Covenant's idea of the Great Journey. When they found out that the true reclaimers were humanity, the Hemogeny panicked and declared war on humanity. This would lead to the inevitable end of the Covenant, as the Great Journey was built on something that didn't exist in the first place. The idea to make a religion and way of life out of a Forerunner's last known records paved the way for several species to advance rapidly, but all that progress was standing on a singular pillar, one which was knocked down once the Covenant was close enough to the end of their journey and achieving their goals. Though the Covenant had broken due to the Great Schism, some refused the truth and continued to revere the Forerunners as gods, leading to a temporary but powerful continuation of the Great Journey. A belief so deeply rooted within certain individuals that it manifested in the creation of an entirely new covenant, one led by Jul and Dama. With Jul and Dama's assassination, however, and the end of the Human-Covenant War, alongside with the discovery of Halo's true purpose, the Great Journey was finally ended. No longer would this mistranslation and the treachery following it would be practiced or believed in. Notably, there may be several factions of believers still, such as the Stoics back on Janjur Quom. Some Grunts and Jiralhani had become devout believers. Even some elites believed the Great Journey, still. But with such factions being small compared to the powers that now control the galaxy, it is safe to say the Great Journey was finally put to rest.
All right, the Great Journey ends here.